Okay, I'm back with my third live stream today in philosophy stuff. So I am going to be doing the second section of the groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. This is a Cambridge edition of Practical Philosophy of works by Immanuel Kant, translated and edited by Mary J. Greger with an introduction by Alan Wood. Both are great people. So I did the first one like a while back. I posted that a while back, and gonna be doing the second one, which is the transition of popular moral philosophy to metaphysics of morals. And there's one more after this, and then that will be. I think there's just one more after this, and that will be the end of the groundwork. And then in this one, we'll get further into the concept of the categorical imperative and about Kant's moral philosophy. So first, however, we're going to get into the concept of duty, which is from common use of our practical reason and its experience of people's conduct. So duty does kind of boil down to conduct. Much can be done in conformity with what duty commands. It is still doubtful whether it's done from duty, but has moral worth. So you can conform to what the concept of duty says, what is moral and what is good, but there's still the idea of intent that does matter. What is the disposition in human nature towards or of human actions towards duty? It is absolutely impossible by means of experience to make out with complete certainty a single case in which the maxim of an action otherwise in conformity with duty rested simply on moral grounds and on representation of one's duty. So it's difficult to pinpoint duty that is like comes from human nature. So like duty can be something that we follow, but not necessarily comes from our own nature. So the categorical imperative kind of goes beyond like moral philosophy that has to do with a concept of duty or of some sort of moral objective concept. It is like something like it's kind of what Kant goes beyond with the categorical imperative. It's still the skeleton of the categorical imperative has this idea of duty, but it kind of goes beyond that. We can't prove that a maxim comes from self-love rather than duty, because there is the possibility of doing something that is morally good based upon trying to do better for yourself rather than for someone else. And it's not actually a real it's not a real determining course of the will. So false attribution to a nobler motive. What counts isn't actions, but inner principles of actions. Big Kantian principle is it's about intent. It's about, well, intent isn't really the right word. It has to do with the will, and the will is something that we'll get into in this section and the next two. Concept of duty isn't drawn from experience. It's a priori. From love of humanity, actions are done in conformity with duty, but no inner principle. Reason, independent of appearances, commends what ought to be done. Duty is an inner principle. It is a priori. The will is determined on a priori grounds. It is an absolute necessity, and it is apodictic moral laws. So, popular moral philosophy. So in these titles of these sections, in this one he's going from popular moral philosophy to metaphysics of morals. Popular moral philosophy, in what he's talking about there, has to do with empirical morality. It has to do with morality that comes from experience. So, laws of determination of the will of our will of rational beings. It's a priori. It's practical reason. The concept of God as the highest God which is an idea of moral perfection. Kant did believe in God. He didn't really, I mean, he did prove it with his ontological argument, but in the Critique of Pure Reason, he did kind of prove it, but it's something that he called numinous, something that we can't really get to. But the concept of God as the highest good, that's an idea of moral perfection that he's trying to get after. Is there no genuine supreme principle of morality here? The metaphysics of morals is opposed to popular moral philosophy, empirical, and the metaphysics of morals is the assent to principles of pure reason rather than a priori. The doctrine of morals grounded in metaphysics, and this is isolated metaphysics of morals. There are no other disciplines, and it is indispensable substratum of all theoretical determined cognition of duties. Pure thought of duty has, by way of reason, the most influence on the human heart, and it's powerful than any other incentives. And only a metaphysics of morals is important, and it has a seat in a priori reason, and it has speculation to the highest degree and no empirical inducements. It needs anthropology for application to human beings, but we must follow and present distinctly the practical faculty of reason from its general rules of determination to where concept of duty arises from it. So, everything in nature works in accordance with laws. Rational being has the ability to act in accordance with representation of laws, and that's in accordance with principles, or it has a will. Rational being has the capacity to act in accordance with laws, and that's from will. The will, that's something that we will also get into even further. Reason required for derivation of actions for laws. So, reasons for why we follow in accordance with such laws. The will is nothing other than practical reason. The reason infallibly determines the will. The good is will having to do with, well, we first have law or duty, which brings actions, like real actions, that is basically abiding by the law, which leads to practical reason, which is the will. The will is exposed also to subjective conditions, not always in accord with objective ones. That's kind of why we have this moral struggle between what the law says to do, or the duty says to do, versus what the subjective conditions that that the will is being subjected to. The will is not in itself completely in conformity with reason. So we have something called necessitation. It is determination of the will in conformity with objective laws. That is, as will is subjectively contingent. The relation of objective laws to will, not thoroughly good, is represented by the wills, and the determination of a rational being through grounds of reason. The representation of an objective principle is insofar as is necessitating for a will is called command of reason, and the formula for command is the imperative. All imperatives are expressed by an ought. Now we're getting to the good stuff here, and all imperatives are expressed by an ought and indicate by this the relation of an objective law of reason to a will that by its subjective constitution isn't necessarily determined by it. To do or not to do something is good. Practical good, distinguished from the agreeable, that is the principle of reason holding for everyone. A perfectly good will stands under objective laws of the good, but is not necessitated. There's no imperative hold for divine will. There's what is called volition here. There's no volition. All imperatives command hypothetically or categorically. Now, hypothetically means that it's instrumental. The good that it has is instrumental. It's a means to the end, but it's not the end. Where also an imperative can command categorically, where it's intrinsically good. It's like what the categorical imperative commands you to do is inherently intrinsically good. So, practical necessity of a possible action as a means to achieving something else that one wills. So, using good to achieve something else, that's kind of what a hypothetical imperative is. It's something like learning something so you can do your job better, or reading so you can understand a certain language better, to talk to people better, and to help people and love people better. The categorical imperative, however, it's objectively necessary of itself, and it does not reference any other good. It's good in itself, and every practical law represents a possible action as good, and as this as necessary for a subject practically determinable by reason. All imperatives are formulae for the determination of an action necessary in accordance with the principle of the will that is good in some way. So, an imperative: actions possible by me that is good. Hypothetical actions good for some possible or actual purpose, problematically practical principles, and are assertorically practical principles. While the categorical imperative, action objectively necessarily and is apodictically practical reason. All sciences have a practical element, and what one can do to attain the end is rational and good. So, purpose of happiness. Happiness is another big issue that is sort of brought up with respect to Kant, and Alan Wood has a great book that does kind of touch on Kant's happiness, touches on the hypothetical imperative. The purpose, happiness, for you to be happy, that is not categorical imperative, that is hypothetical imperative. You being happy it's not about you being happy, according to Kant. You being happy is not categorical imperative. It's the purpose of happiness is actual in the case of all rational beings. It is a natural necessity, and it is an actual hypothetical imperative, and it is assertoric. It's an assertoric practical principle, and it is that is in the hypothetical imperative is something of a promotion of happiness, and that's just it. But you, according to Kant, you shouldn't live your life trying to make yourself happy. And if you live your life to make yourself happy more than anything else, you will go further and further away from being happy. Because you should have categorical imperative as number one, which usually means at least a good bit of beneficence towards others. Then happiness comes thereafter. So, about prudence now. Prudence is another big principle. It's skill in the choice of means to one's own greatest well-being. That's another big one. So, sorry, I have to flip through these pages because my notes are split by a few pages. Okay. So, the imperative refers to choice of means to one's own happiness. Prudence, it is still hypothetical imperative. It still means that 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 trying to maintain your own happiness is good, but it's not like concept of duty good. It's not like that. So, categorical, the form and principle from which action itself follows. It is essentially good. It consists in disposition, and it is imperative of morality. Now about volition. Volition is we have dissimilarity is in necessitation of the will, and it counsels the rule of skill or the counsels of prudence. The commands or laws of morality. Laws are unconditional and they are objective. Now, how are all imperatives possible, he may ask? How does necessitation of the will occur? And we have imperatives of skill here. And wills are indispensable, necessary means to it. And with happiness, one cannot act for the sake of being happy, like I said before. And then we also have imperatives of prudence, which means that does mean that you should somewhat try to be happy, but you cannot act that way for the sake of your own happiness. You cannot command present actions as objectively necessary. So, with imperatives and morality, there is no example empirically given. It's a priori and it's a priori possibility of the categorical imperative, and that is the tenet of practical law. It is a priori synthetic practical proposition, and there's no theoretical cognition, like I said before. And we know what it contains. The categorical imperative, it's a maxim that must be in conformity with this law. So we're going to have the first one, the first categorical imperative here, the first maxim. This is big here. Act only in accordance with that maxim, through which you can at that same time will that it become universal law. Now, this is huge here because it's saying that if you're going to go out and do something, it has to be good enough that you can will that it's universal law to where everybody has to do it. It has to be that good. It has to be on that high of a standard. Now, there are people like Paul Guyer who have explained this way better. There are books on Kant. There are tons of books on Kant that really just elucidate this way better than I am doing right now. So we derive all imperatives of duty from this, really. All of them are derived from this. And it constitutes what is properly called nature, or universal laws. So what is the universal imperative? It's kind of similar. Act as if the maxim of your action were to become by your will a universal law of nature. And so it has to do with don't break promises. It has to do with pay your bills. Has to do with loving others. Has to do with paying back money you borrow. It's very, very high standard. Like it means that you have to be. It means you have to be a very, very good person, and it goes even above the things that I've just mentioned. With duty, we have the categorical imperative principle of all duty. I'm going to summarize really fast before I move on. Duty is the practical unconditional necessity of action and holds for all rational beings. It's a law for human wills. Philosophy is pure sustainer of its own laws. The will is the capacity to to determine itself to acting in conformity. The human being exists as an does the human being exist as an end in itself and not as a means? That's another big one that we're going to get here. The practical imperative. This is the second one. Act that you use humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, always at the same time as an end, not merely as a means. Another big one. And this kind of has to do with being beneficent towards others. Has to do with being a good person towards others and having love for others. Love, I guess, would not be the Kantian way to say it, but it's kind of like that. He who transgresses the rights of human beings intends to make use of the person of others merely as a means, without considering values as ends. There's not enough that the action doesn't conflict with humanity and our person as an end in itself. The action must harmonize with humanity. So this kind of makes humanity as a big thing that must be valued, respected, and acted in accordance with, and use them as the end of which you act. That's a big one. Like, these are big things, and like, just to I mean, I highly doubt that there's anybody out there who lives like this on a daily basis. I mean, there are good people, like, you know, I'm sure that you and I have very good high standard of morals, but do we live exactly like this every single day? I highly doubt it. I mean, everyone breaks promises, everyone lies, or every now and then everyone, you know, does something that's unsavory. Predispositions in humanity towards greater perfections. This is the presentation of humanity. It is meritorious duty to others. The will of every rational being is a will giving universal law. The principle of every human will, the will giving universal law, through all its maxims, based on no interest and is unconditional. So, another big one. There is the autonomy of the will, and there's the heteronomy of the will. The autonomy of the will, it is imperative, turns out conditional, not fit for moral commands. And there's the heteronomy of the will, which is property of the will by which it is law to itself, independently of any property. Oh wait, that was autonomy. My notes are fucked up. I'm sorry. The autonomy of the will is property of the will by which it is law to itself, independently of any property, to choose only that the maxims of your choice are included as such in some volition. Heteronomy of the will is will seeking the law that is to determine it anywhere else than in the fitness of its maxims for its own giving of the will. The will doesn't give itself the law. Instead, the object, by means of relation to the will, gives law to it, and that's has to do with the the hypothetical imperatives too. The kingdom of ends. This is a big one too. And at some point, I want to do like a smaller video about like getting bigger into this. I'm trying to rush a little bit to get through some stuff in this section because it's kind of big. But I do want to make some other videos kind of getting further into this stuff. The kingdom of ends, a systematic union of various rational beings through common laws. Laws determine ends by universal validity. Rational beings belong to this as sovereign. And not subject to the will of any other. Rational beings must regard himself as law-giving in a kingdom of ends, possible through freedom of the will, sovereign as he is an independent being. It's very interesting. It's like has morality at the highest standard possible, if you're going to be in that kind of state. Duty is the necessity of action in accordance with principle of maxims, and it is practical necessitation. There is no sovereign in that. What laws the rational gives, the rational being gives, he obeys, and that's what is called dignity. So more about the kingdom of ends. There is price or there is dignity here. There is general human inclinations and needs, market price, and there's conformity with taste, and there's no need in duty. There is the fancy price, where there's a delight, purposeless play of our mental powers. There's autonomy, a ground of the dignity of human nature and of every national rational nature. So there are three kinds of maxims. There's form. Form consists in universality, the formula of the moral imperative, as if they were to hold the universal laws. Second, there's matter, which is an end, where a rational being is the limiting condition of all relative and arbitrary ends. And three, there is the complete determination of all maxims, where maxims from any law-giving maxims from one's law-giving harmonize with the kingdom of ends and the kingdom of nature, where the will is absolutely good. So this is the number 3, the categorical imperative number 3. Act in accordance with maxims that can at the same time have as their object themselves as universal laws of nature. And that's rational nature. So furthermore, morality is the relation of actions to the autonomy of the will, to a possible giving of universal law through its maxims. Actions that can coexist with autonomy of the will is permitted, and ones that don't are forbidden. Will whose maxims necessarily harmonize with laws of autonomy is a wholly, absolutely good will. So that's kind of the big parts. This is a big it's a big section. Like, all of these are big and dense. It's good to read through them to kind of get a sense of what he's going for. And I would like to sort of do smaller videos that like really get into some of these concepts better than I have done here. But I've kind of sort of like done a cursory going over them. Let me know if I've messed up anything, or if I've said anything wrong. Or if you want to discuss this more, I'd love to discuss that with you in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching this Kant live stream.